Moments take so very. Well, hello. It's so wonderful to connect with you again. I hope everything has gone as smoothly and as positively as it can in the last time since we saw each other. And I'm so excited to share with you the second half of Chinua Achebe's amazing novel, Things Fall Apart, written in the mid-century, but I think in many ways still very actively speaking to us today. So just one small announcement before I mention why I was playing the music that was just sending us in and also is posted on the Purple and Gold website. I will be uploading and you will be able to access the final assignment today. That is to say Monday evening through to Tuesday morning. And that gives you until Thursday of next week to write that small essay. There's a prompt, which I hope you'll find helpful. Please do reach out to your TAs and or to me if you have any questions. At the core, what we're simply asking you to do is to think about which two works you have found particularly impactful and to take a moment to write about both of them. So please look for that prompt posted right on the front of the Purple and Gold website and also available through Canvas as soon as your TAs are able to upload it. So let me take one moment to explain to you why I was playing Wasis Diop, the amazing Senegalese musician and singer, which we just had as our introduction this time. First of all, he's like one of my favorite African musicians. But second of all, I actually wanted us to have in mind both the language he's speaking in and also the content of what he's saying. So Wasis Diop is singing in Wolof, which is a Senegalese language from Senegal in West Africa. And so today I've got a few things I want you to listen to. All of them are African, but none of them are Nigerian. In some ways, this novel, Things Fall Apart, is both very specifically Nigerian, but it's also become a kind of signature piece for the entire continent of Africa as well. So I wanted us to listen to some West African. A little later, we'll also have some South African music as well. The second reason I wanted you to take a moment to listen to this particularly beautiful song is because it has a theme that I think is helpful for understanding Okonkwo. What is it like to be someone for whom an entire world is never enough? What is it like to be someone who is always unsatisfied, always disappointed, and always resentful? Achebe gives us in Things Fall Apart a combination of a portrait of Nigeria at the beginning of the colonial period on the way to literally the nation of Nigeria being created. But he also gives us a portrait of a very specific person, the anti-hero Okonkwo. And from the very beginning, I've been asking you all to think about whether we connect more with people who are exemplary and perfect, or whether we enjoy experiencing time and hearing the stories, experiencing the pain in this case, especially of people who have very real limitations, who are flawed the way that we are, perhaps, in our own lives. So I want us to look at a number of episodes. We left things in a pretty hard place. We left everything at that moment when Ikemefuna is going to be sacrificed because the peace has failed, and unfortunately sacrificed by Okonkwo personally, despite the fact that as his adoptive father, as the person who is his host, of all the people in the town, Okonkwo is the one who should not be involved in the violence. But I'm going to take us through a few things. I want us to look at the arrival of the English, of the missionaries, of the colonial powers and the police. I want us to look at the role of women. Sometimes Achebe has been viewed as someone who doesn't take care of gender questions. And although they're brief, I think the episodes around women in this novel are unusually impactful for us. And then take us through the very intense events that lead to the famous conclusion, which asks us if Achebe had not taken the time to write this novel, if you had not been so kind as to take the time to read this novel, would we ever know anything other than a couple of lines, like Borges's history book, about very real and very complex and very meaningful lives? So I left you last time right in the middle, and it has to do with the turnaround. Okonkwo has decided that he's going to intervene and he's going to create one of his first transgressions, breaking the rules of hospitality in an intense way, the kind that was hinted at when we were looking at Shakuntala and her decision or at least her lack of mindfulness for not letting someone in who sought sanctuary. But if in the middle of the novel, one of the big events is the death, the murder, the assassination, the sacrifice, you can decide what you think it is, of Ikemefuna, what's also in the very middle of the novel is the arrival of the missionaries. In Achebe's text, they show up on 3002. The arrival of the missionaries, Achebe tells us, had caused a considerable stir in the village of Umbanta. So what follows is a fairly, for some people comical, for other people controversial, maybe even disrespectful account of what the African community thought of the new religion that the English were trying to introduce. That is to say, Christianity. Like Montaigne, Achebe is inviting us to reflect on this strange new religion that imagines itself to be superior and yet is rather more perplexing than anything else to the locals. So in 3003, the missionaries are trying to explain to the local community why they need to convert. And actually, this was a major activity of colonial powers all over the world, but certainly of the English in Nigeria, the conversion of the local community to Christianity. So having a back and forth with the powerful men who run the community, and I just wanted to share with you a little bit of the dialogue on 3003, but then especially to look at what Nwoye, one of Nkonkwo's sons, thinks and feels about this new religion. So the locals are being told, you need to become Christians. And they have the following question back. If we leave our gods and follow your God, asked another man, who will protect us from the anger of our neglected gods and ancestors? And the Christian missionary replies very bluntly, your gods are not alive. They cannot do you any harm. They're just pieces of wood and stone. When this was interpreted to the men of Umbanta, they broke into derisive laughter. And so I hope you heard the echo of Montaigne here with the problems of translation. So I think Achebe is inviting us, rather as Montaigne does, to reflect on how we judge things as being mere superstition, how we think about things as being delusional or somehow trivial, and when we decide they're really important, impactful, and a matter of true faith. So I don't know whether you spend much time in traditional Christian spaces, but whether you do or you don't, you may well have a sense that there are very regularly objects, sculptures, installations, often made of wood and stone, often figural, that is to say, images of something like Jesus crucified on the cross, the Virgin Mary holding the baby Jesus. We saw that with Montaigne as he resonated his illustration with that, or an image of a saint, a statue of a saint. Even in a very abstract and understated Christian church, it's quite regular to have an abstract image of a cross. And it's quite regular for them to be made of wood and to be made of stone. Achebe's villagers in pre-colonial Nigeria are not able to understand why their religion is somehow inferior. And maybe we're being invited to understand how Christianity has relied so much on sculpture made out of wood and stone, images that help people to believe. So the arguments about theology, the attempt to explain to the locals that they are being, in some sense, superstitious, fail. But then the missionaries do something which actually is part of the colonial history of Africa. They start to sing. And what they particularly do is they start to sing hymns that are about suffering and about consolation and about how belief can give you strength and resilience. So I'm going to use here probably the most famous African a cappella group. They're called Ladysmith Black Mambazo. They're coming out of South Africa in this case, and the language they're singing in is Zulu. So the song I've chosen, which is about seeking in the mother, and this could be the Virgin Mary if you're Christian, or it could be a kind of female world spirit. Seeking in the mother is where consolation and strength is found. So Nomatemba, Mother of Hope, is the title of the song. And I just wanted, before we hear what Nwoye feels as he listens to this music, this unfamiliar music, what the modern analogy is of the fusion of African song on the one hand and Christian hymns on the other. So here's a little bit of Nomathemba, Mother of Hope, for you. Well, I hate to fade it out, same as with the Wasis Diop, but if you'd like to listen to the entirety of both of those pieces, they're both posted for you on the website. Achebe invites us to think about, and several times we've had song, particularly with Shakuntala, will be part of our conversation, to think about the extraordinary impact that music can have. As he recounts the events, then the missionaries burst into song. It was one of those gay and rollicking tunes of evangelism, which had the power of plucking at silent and dusty chords in the heart of an Igbo man. So you've just heard one of the hymns, here a modern version of it out of South Africa. Just before we get to the bottom of the page, the last paragraph, we get a description of how Okonkwo's alienated son, all these sons and fathers who do not get on well, responds to this music. But there was a young lad, we're told, who had been captivated. His name was Moye, Okonkwo's first son. It was not the mad logic of the Trinity that captivated him. He did not understand it. It was the poetry of the new religion, something felt in the marrow. The hymn about brothers who sat in darkness and in fear seemed to answer a vague and persistent question that haunted his young soul. The question of the twins crying in the bush, the question of Ikemefuna who was killed. He felt a relief within as the hymn poured into his parched soul. The words of the hymn were like the drops of frozen rain melting on the dry palate of the panting earth, and Moye's callow mind was greatly puzzled. It's actually my favorite line in the whole novel is that specific one. The idea that music, when it's the right music for you, is like drops of freezing rain falling on your dry mouth as though you were the earth itself. In the midst of his unhappiness, in the midst of his suffering, what the missionaries give him is a song that gives him consolation, that helps him cope with things that frightened him, things that made him dislike his father, things that seemed unjust. Achebe is continually going to give us a really complicated portrait of how colonialism affected Nigeria, both the very bad things, which are of course the dominant, but then also these small moments that are impactful and positive. Nwoye's story needs to be told, and he's not even Okonkwo, he's just Okonkwo's son. Often Achebe is accused, I think that may be the word, accused of not having told the story of anything other than a great man, like Okonkwo. And yet I think there are places, we already paused for a second over Chielo, that the ultimate source of meaning and justice in the community is actually a woman who's got the status of being a kind of prophet. But when we get to chapter 9, the story pauses for Okonkwo, and instead we hear about his wife and about one of the children in his household.